start, huh? You think so?
Sure.
You have to unmute yourself. All right, okay. I'll start then.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Kendall Williams. My wife, Charlotte, and I here host this discussion called The Tea House out of our basement here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or outside of Philadelphia. This discussion that we host is really to help everyone understand and explore the Baha'i faith and the Baha'i teachings. It's for everyone. So you don't have to be a Baha'i, nor do you have to really know anything about the Baha'i faith. We are here to learn together. The Baha'i faith is a majestic and beautiful body of knowledge that is so deep and wondrous, really. And what we do in these sessions is we take a little nugget and we dig into it a little bit more deeply. But really, as if you were to study the Baha'i teachings, you'd find that they're truly universal and can be understood very easily by everybody. The Baha'i faith is, of course, one of the major religions of the world now, with over 7 million followers. It's the most diverse religion on earth. It's also the newest world religion. We are followers of Baha'u'llah, like Christians are followers of Christ. Muslims are followers of Muhammad. And Baha'u'llah taught that all of these great religions all over the world really reflect the truths revealed to humanity at different times in history, and they're all part of one faith. So the idea of oneness is a major idea in the Baha'i faith, not only in terms of sort of theoretically that there's one God and there's one great religion of God that really reveals itself throughout history, but also that we are all just one people all around the world. One of the beautiful ideas in the Baha'i teachings is that there is a harmony between science and religion, that this great body of knowledge, which has evolved over the last 300 years and produced so many technologies, the technologies that we're speaking on today, this body of knowledge we call science, is really not fundamentally in contradiction with the fundamental truths of religion. And that requires us, I think, to think deeply about both science and religion, so that we don't think about these things in a superficial way. The great teachings of religion, if studied on their most profound features, can tell us a great deal about the world. And so this is going to be a major theme in the Tea House discussions, because major people all over the world, as they study the Baha'i faith, more and more people are coming at it not from a religious background or even from any particular religion's background, but actually from a scientific background. So to understand it and how the Baha'i faith explains reality in a similar way that the science explains reality is one of the major themes that we'll be addressing throughout the Tea House. So, I had been very impressed by our speakers tonight's articles on BahaiTeachings.org and in some other places, because he's thought very deeply about these issues of where science and religion meet. And so I asked him to come on and have a discussion with us. So I'd like to introduce Vahid Houston Ranjbar. Vahid is a physicist, a PhD in physics. He is works at the Brookhaven National Lab, which I believe is in Connecticut, but he lives in Long Island. But he can clarify that when I hand.
Yeah, it's in Long Island, actually.
Yeah, it's on Long Island. Well, there we go.
Yeah.
But you can find his work on BahaiTeachings.org, as well as through Medium. And he has a website called The Atomizer, ATOMIZER.org, where a lot of what he's written has been collected, and he's linked those too. That's his own personal website. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Vahid. He'll share his screen and some slides.
Certainly. Thank you for inviting me. And, I just want to give a disclaimer. Baha'is kind of realize this, but people who may not. We don't have a clergy in the Baha'i faith, and so everything that I'm going to say here are my own ideas, and they can be totally wrong. So just you should understand that it doesn't represent anything official or anything like that nature. So First, when we think about Pythagoras, his life, you see that it's really connected deeply with the myths that are at the heart of mathematics and science and philosophy. And his life actually is interesting. Is that he traveled quite a bit and was studied for over 10 years with the Egyptians in the temples with the priests. And that lasted until there was a war with Persia. And the Persians defeated the Egyptians, and he was taken away as a captive and taken back to Babylon. But however, because of his knowledge and his intelligence, he actually became very much liked by the Persians, and eventually ended up studying also with them, with the priestly class there, the Magi. And they released him about 5 years later, and he returned then to his native home of Samos. Now, of course, many of you know Pythagoras from the Pythagorean theorem. You probably learned in grade school and whatnot, which, however, he's probably not really the author of. But the idea that he introduced was really this concept that reality is really reduced to numbers, that numbers are somehow very important to how reality is constructed. And he believed in this type of number mysticism, where the example of this is that the number one was called the monad, and that's kind of shown down here in my graphic. It's kind of the symbol of it. And that was responsible for the creation of all things. So all things flowed from the monad. And then the number two was called the dyad, and that was responsible for all matter. And so on. Another important idea that he is purported to introduce is this relationship between mathematics and music, actually. So he recognized that there's this important relationship between how harmonies are made and this idea of ratios in mathematics. But he took it a little even further and claimed that this was related also to the very movement of the planets and the celestial objects. And so there's this kind of idea of the harmony of the spheres, which will become very important throughout different cultures, which they would pick up on this idea. Now, later on, Plato kind of picked up the ideas of Pythagoras. And only he, instead of referring now just to the numbers, he converted it really to geometry. And he thought that geometry was primal, and so he referred to them as forms. And so in his view, Plato's view, that the whole of the universe was really the physical expressions that we see are really a projection of these forms. They're shadows of these forms. And that everything represents these imperfect copies of these kind of these templates, which are these ideas, these idealized forms. And those are the real substance of the universe, are these forms. And the allegory that he used was presented in Plato's Republic. He relates how there's these, to kind of illustrate this, he relates that there's this, imagine that there are these prisoners that are in this underground dungeon. And they're raised there all their lives, and they have these chains around their neck so that they can't see anywhere except what's in front of them. And on the opposite wall of them are projected the shadows, which are cast by this big torch behind their head of these different objects. And because they're raised this way, they mistake these shadows that they see projected on them for the actual reality of things. And then what so happens, it's at some point in time, one of the prisoners frees himself, and he looks around and he realizes the nature of the deception. And then he tries to tell his fellow prisoners what's going on. So this freed individual is now likened to the awakened, a spiritually awakened person or an enlightened philosopher. And all the prisoners are considered to be all of humanity, and the shadows are what we take to be the material world. Now, going further in time, you get to the more kind of pre-modern age with the kind of the birth of science with Kepler. was really quite heavily influenced by the ideas of Pythagoras, and especially the idea of the harmony of the spheres. In his heliocentric model of the universe, he proposed this interesting idea that he believed that all the planets that were orbiting the sun kind of formed these Platonic geometric solids. And it was really in his like obsession with these ratios and looking at them in the heavens that he actually stumbled upon a very important idea of the elliptical motion, the laws of the elliptical motion of the planets. And this was actually very important for later on with Newton. He used these to then derive the universal laws of gravitation, kind of based on this. Also, a little bit later, you have Leibniz. He was also another person that was really influenced by Pythagorean ideas. He was a contemporary of Newton and co-inventor of calculus. And he also made some important contributions to lots of mathematics, but as well to physics, physics of statics and dynamics. But he also had this idea, he picked up on the idea of monads. And he actually had this theory or his idea of the universe that he believed it was made up of these infinite number of these monads. And that these monads kind of existed outside of time, yet they would evolve and change. And they could be created and destroyed, but they weren't physical things. And so it was based on this idea that he actually proposed a very modern idea that actually space and time were relative, which was contrary to what Newton believed, and most of the people then at his time believed that you know, space and time were these absolute backgrounds, which then physics progressed, which of course, you know, became true with kind of some way was foreshadowed what happened with Einstein's ideas of relativity, where he showed that space and time are relative. Now, moving to the more modern age, what we see is that these Pythagorean ideas have still persisted. And I think a good one way to see this was in 1960s, the Nobel laureate and physicist Eugene Wigner. He penned this really important article. It was entitled "The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in Natural Science." And in this article, he was expressing a core of a question that had been really bubbling up even before the birth of quantum mechanics and all the weirdness that came along with that, which is, how is it that mathematics, which is developed to describe one type of physical phenomenon, can so easily be used to explain other phenomena, which have little to do one with another? Now, of course, from the point of view of Plato's theory, this actually would seem natural, since we see with the rise of the mathematics, we have better and better ways of representing these Platonic forms. So for example, we see with a perfect circle and other geometric shapes that we can represent these using very simple formulas. However, as we happen upon more complex ideas or Platonic forms, we find that we can start to express these with more complex forms of mathematics. And thus, over time, mathematicians have learned to express ideas as abstract as different sorts of infinities, sets, or even classes of motion. And in fact, I think one might view mathematics in general as developing a means to unambiguously represent the Platonic forms of the universe in an unambiguous way. I think it is due to this and other things that there are some theoretical physicists today who are, in a kind of return to Pythagorean philosophy, entertain a very radical view of math, that it somehow represents the true nature of reality. So it's not just that the physical universe is described by mathematics, but it actually is mathematics. And in my opinion, the logic for this is very compelling. And I'm going to kind of relate the way I understand it. And basically it goes as follows, that all that we can know about our universe is really governed by the degree to which we can measure. If there is something that we cannot measure, either directly or indirectly through its effects, then by definition, it doesn't exist in our universe. Now, this doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means we just have no way of interacting with it and obtaining knowledge about it. So we have to place it outside of our universe. Thus, by definition, everything in our universe must be amenable to some sort of measurement. Now, to measure something is to establish quantifiable relationships between things. So semantically, to say that the universe is mathematical, some might just think it's, well, it's saying equivalent to saying that our universe is measurable. But I think there's a little bit more to unpack here. And the contention, as I understand it, is that the real things of our universe are these quantifiable relationships. I like to call it relational information. Perhaps a Platonist might call it forms. And this is that the actual matter of our universe are both not knowable and actually maybe unimportant to our reality. So for example, we can never know what an electron actually is. What we do know is an electron as it's defined is defined by its charge, its mass, and its spin. And these quantities themselves are known only relative to another thing's charge, mass, or spin. Thus, we can only establish a thing's quantitative relationships relative to other things. And I like to quote James C. Maxwell here. He's the father of electromagnetic theory. I think he kind of explains this idea better even. He said, it's only when we contemplate not matter in itself, but the form in which it actually exists, that our minds can find something on which it can lay hold. Actually, Abdu'l-Baha expresses a similar sentiment in a little bit a different way in one of his talks. He says, when we consider the world of existence, we find that the essential reality underlying any given phenomenon is unknown. Phenomenal or created things are known to us only by their attributes. Man discerns manifestations or attributes of objects, while the identity or reality of them remains hidden. So in this context, we can see that attributes are really the things that we perceive or are measurable. So if tomorrow, all the objects of the universe were suddenly to be replaced with other objects, yet the exact same mathematical relationships between them were to be maintained, I would suggest that there is no way we could tell the difference. There is no measurement or experiment which would allow us to distinguish between these two universes. In fact, one could maintain that they are the same. And thus, what makes our universe what it is given by this math. Hence, it is these mathematical relationships which determine what things are, and not any reference to a primal or elementary substance. In reality, a digital simulation kind of represents a version of this as this type of substitution of matter. A digital simulation of any physical phenomenon represents an attempt to recreate the mathematical relationships of matter within the physics of a digital computer. It also should not escape notice in this connection that this is the reason the recently popularized simulation hypothesis put forward by Nick Bostrom and others really amounts to a sort of retelling of the Plato's cave-in allegory. Bostrom, if you're unfamiliar, posits that most probably our consciousness represents agents in some advanced simulation. And he does this based on, by extrapolating from our existing technology and some probabilistic arguments. Now, beyond Bostrom's view, which I think are many dubious assumptions, I think his view suffers since it really doesn't take the argument to its logical and what is seemingly obvious conclusion. And that is the conclusion of the primacy of forms and the subversion of materialism, which I think Plato's allegory makes abundantly clear. Beyond this, what's interesting is that you can also see this illustration of this substitution of matter in this the new theory actually developed in the 70s called renormalization group theory. It provides an illustration of this with the idea of an effective field and what are called the universality classes. Renormalization group theory grew out of issues of handling infinities that plagued early versions of quantum field theory. By the early 1970s, the work of individuals like Kendall, Kandolf, and many others had shown that this was really an issue of the scale at which these theories work. So renormalization group theory provided a framework to address the limits of physical theories relative to scale in a very mathematically rigorous manner. And in doing so, they showed how scale and coherence can play in the emergent physical attributes of nature, looking at, for example, charge, mass, spin, and also even the appearance of solids and liquids in gaseous states and gaseous states of matter. The profound insight of renormalization group theory is that at a given scale, is that at a given energy scale, one can define exactly all the observed physical phenomenon by using what is called an effective field. This effective field description will remain true and exact at a given macroscopic scale. And what's interesting here is this is regardless of the microscale physical details. So you can actually have very contradictory fundamental theories of how the universe works, which agree at a certain scale, and they'll be indistinguishable from each other. You will see the same physical phenomenon. And another example of this is in what is known as a critical phenomenon. This is also in the context of renormalization theory. And here they showed the existence of what are called universality classes. And these are really a set of mathematical models which flow towards a single type of self-similar behavior that change as its scale is changed. And so really the crux of this idea is that you can see, again, identical physical behavior can be observed across a diverse range of physical systems. So that there is some phenomenon that is completely independent of the actual materials involved. One example of this is when you look at the phase transition of water from a liquid to a gas at a certain critical temperature and pressure, or the magnetic behavior of certain systems. So this type of universality class, again, provides even more evidence for the Pythagorean argument that it is these mathematical relationships that are primary and not the actual matter in determining what is. Thus, our true being lies in these relationships, and it is to mathematics that one must turn if we are to understand our physical origin and basis, since it is these relationships that determine the physical nature of existence. Now, this math actually precedes the physical expression of things in our universe, since even fundamental particles can pop in and out of existence. But the mathematical relationships that determine their form are always true. So when we consider mathematics, we observe many provable theorems, and these things are always true, independent of the physical existence, their physical existence in space and time, and they cannot be defeated. Now, if you think about this in a certain way, you see that these, what I've just described here, represents that several attributes of a deity, which is omnipresent, eternal, and omnipotent. They cannot be defeated. So I think one way to view the argument for a deity is that these mathematical laws are just emanations of a much, much higher object. One example of which is human consciousness, which at the very least is a higher form of expression of these mathematical relationships, though I'm sure it's probably much, much more than that. But whatever the nature of the maths which underlie consciousness, it is capable of being a causal agent in the world. This implies that there are certain sorts of maths that can be causative. A virus, for example, a new idea or a concept. These, the introduction of a novel mathematical relationship or a new idea can actually directly change the physical world. Further, mathematical relationships which express human consciousness can also coarse grain to a higher form with powers that exceed that of a single human mind. And the example of this is in collective action of humans. So we see that humans collectively are able to solve problems and modify their environment in a manner and a scale that individual humans just could never do. So my argument, one argument for a deity is that at a large enough coarse-grained scale, be it physical or functional, a consciousness must exist that approximates all the attributes commonly ascribed to a deity. At each coarse-graining level, the emergent consciousness approximates better and better and better a deity from which all of these mathematical truths must emanate. Of course, this is not a proof, nor am I claiming it is, but I think it is an argument based on a reasonable extrapolation of the observed abilities of human and collective consciousness. Now, as a Baha'i, I would claim that one doesn't actually need to search the expanse of the universe to recognize that our Earth has already hosted individuals who manifest all these attributes. Examples are like Christ, Muhammad, Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, and we Baha'is believe more recently the Bab and Baha'u'llah. These individuals manifested love, knowledge, and released creative forces in society on a level beyond that of ordinary human consciousness. And relative to them, ordinary human consciousness might be likened to that of maybe a lower mammal. And so to my thinking, their very existence actually vindicates the existence of a deity. So I'd like to kind of close what I'm saying here with a quote I love from the Hidden Words of Baha'u'llah. He says, "O son of man," let me get to the quote here, sorry. "O son of man, wert thou to speed to the immensity of space and traverse the expanse of heaven, yet thou wouldst find no rest, save in submission to our command and humbleness before our face."
Vahid, that was great. I think I may be the only one unmuted. I want to ask you a couple questions to try and get the discussion flowing. And I want to start with one of the popular ideas out there that we've all been inundated with, and that's materialism. Can you define materialism?
So I think the materialism is a belief, from my viewpoint, is that all that there is in existence are the things that all that exists are these atoms and things that are bumping around into each other, and
Right.
we're just a product of those things that are bumping around into each other, and that's it.
Right.
And there's nothing more. And I would add to that the idea that there is no will that is guiding these things bumping around to each other, that they're just either purely deterministic or purely random, that they have a mixture of both, and there's no will behind those behaviors.
So there's no will behind them, and there's no intelligence behind them.
Yes, thus there's no intelligence, yes.
So one of the ideas I think that's been impressive to me, and I recently gave a talk for Modern Perspective saying why I believe in God, and I highlighted this in one of my slides, and that is this idea that human consciousness is able to do math, right? And that math is this abstract concept that we even derive from this language we've developed, this mathematical language we've developed, other mathematical ideas, including imaginary numbers, for instance, right? And other things that are simply derivations of our language, right? Deductions of our language, but then become useful when we actually start to study the natural world. So the fact that, we're able to derive a language from the world and then abstractly work through that, make deductions within that, and then apply that back to the world suggests to me something very strong about the world, that the world is mathematical, as you had said, but also that for some reason we're able to figure that out, right? And we can live in this abstract mathematical universe. Lynn Butler's on the call. Lynn's professor of mathematics, and she's doing math all the time. You're doing math all the time, and yet that's actually, and it's just a game we play in some ways, right? but it's actually comes back down to reality. Am I understanding that to be one of the points you made?
Yeah, I mean that's one way to say it. I mean, I was even going stronger in saying that what we understand to be the physicality is almost it doesn't matter what the physical stuff is.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what I think people who go off on the tangent, they start worrying about, like you've seen the simulation hypothesis. People are like, oh, we're in a computer simulation, you know, and I'm like, that's misses. First of all, I think there's lots of problems with the assumptions there, but let's give in that, you know, the whole premise is mistaken, because then you ask yourself, okay, if we are in a simulation, then I wake up out of that simulation, then the same rules apply. That should also be in a simulation. You get infinite recursion, right. You know, and so really the point there that I think that the point there is that what matters, it's irrelevant if you're in the computers. It doesn't matter. What matters are these relationships.
Right.
You know, that's what makes reality. That's what a reality is these relationships. You know, and these relationships ultimately are eternal. They're founded on math, which is an eternal thing, which is it will always be, is always there. You know.
Right. So the actual physical world doesn't make a difference. It's only the relationship between objects at any level, the macro level, the
yes.
micro level, and so forth, right? That make the world what it
yes. is. And scale matters too. That's another thing. You know, like you look at like the scale. You know, on one scale, if I'm at this macroscopic scale, I see a table and I put my hand on it, right? Now, if I zoom down and I get a really small scale, all of a sudden I can pass through that, right? Yeah. And so depending on the scale I look at it, it takes on different attributes. It's a different reality. You know? So the reality that we experience is scale dependent. It's not, yeah, anyway.
So I'm going to make one more point / question, and then I know other people have things that they'd like to ask as well. Mm-hmm. My wife, Charlotte, who's on the call and is doing all the background work with the hosting, we were outside and a snowflake landed on my daughter's coat, and we just looked at it. It was a fresh snowflake, and it's just this amazing, you know, it's just symmetrical, proportional, right? It's a mathematical phenomenon, right? It just looks like it was drawn there. And, you know, I think that something you said reminded me that things happen at different levels, right? Mm-hmm. That there's these truths that occur at different levels of reality, right?
Right.
Baha said something to the same effect, right?
That,
yes, but please, yeah.
No, I mean, there's, I've been spending time. I mean, if you look at, there's a provisional translation of the Abdu'l-Baha's Tablet of the Universe, and there's a piece of it where he talks exactly about the importance of scale. He really is describing scale and variance. This idea that the fact that, you know, he uses the example of like the drops being similar to the ocean, the atoms similar to the sun. And what's interesting is he relates that back to this idea of a coherence between things. Yeah. And one of the interesting insights of renormalization group theory is precisely that the reason why you have this self-similarity in physical phenomena has to do with the coherence length that things express in a given system that it has. And as that coherence length becomes infinite, then you get things becoming infinitely recursive, like you see in a snowflake, because it's infinitely recursive. It's scale invariant, at least on some level.
Yeah. That's wonderful. I think I may have gotten that idea from reading your article on the Tablet of the Universe. Yeah. So let me stop talking and open it up to others to enter into the dialogue. Our good friend Michael Champion, who left Philadelphia, went to Peru, is here, and so we'd love to hear from Michael.
Hey, hi.
Hi, how are you guys?
Great seeing you guys. It's wonderful. Yeah, we're so happy to have some conversation and human contact here through Zoom in this abstract reality that we're in the Zoom meeting. So, like, I really like to say hello to you guys, but I'm wondering, when I understand that we've been told in the Baha'i faith that this world is like not the real world, and that the real world is the world of the spirit, or the spiritual world, right?
Right.
And then, but also that when we pass from this world, we enter into these worlds of God, and that's the real world. But then I'm thinking, well, how can they be the real world if there's like this untouchable reality? Are they the real world? How do you reconcile all that? Like, is the spiritual world the real world? Do we enter that? Do we experience that? And then do we go through other worlds of God in the future? Or I mean, I don't even know if there's like time in that
Yeah.
spiritual world, right? So how does that kind of work together there?
Yeah, there's a really good quote, and maybe I can dig it up here, from Abdul Baha, where he basically explains that he describes, for example, that the relationship between uh, a plant, a plant to, let's say, an animal, is similar to the relationship of that basically the animal represents a spiritual reality for the plant. And so the idea here is that these are relative grades. So when we say something is spiritual, we're really referring to it's a grades of perception. So what Abdullah actually talks about is that there is really, it gets rid of this idea of dualism between matter and spirit. Everything is exists in one universe. You know, we're all in this cosmos. There's not like a division. It's really the problem is, as I understand it, is a question of perception, a question of perceiving these forms, that at this level of existence, we just are not capable of understanding and viewing these worlds of God. They exist around us. We're in it. We're submerged in it. We're living in it right now. We just don't have a perception of it. And when we die, presumably, that will be exposed to us. But my guess is that there's still more. This is an infinite grade of ascension.
So kind of like this world is like the world that is not the real world, in the sense that, like, for a plant, it is its real world in its station, but to the animal, that's not the real world, right? That's so it's like endless realer worlds, I guess. I'm trying, I think.
Yeah, a hierarchy, I think, of yeah.
Hmm.
I would think it's a hierarchy. So, yeah, that's.
And
thank you.
You know, this idea of sort of relativism, if you were, where relationalism is I think is prominent in the Baha'i teachings and in the Baha'i writings. That, like, for instance, if you ask the South, for Baha'is, what is heaven and hell? Well, there are different situations in which Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah use the concept of heaven and hell in the writings, but they all are relational, you know. So to be immersed in one's material desires is hell. To be relieved from that is heaven. But there are sort of infinite grades of heaven and hell, right? You're constantly passing through sort of cycles of going, as you evolve as a person spiritually, through different levels of heaven and hell, of reunion and separation, if you will. I'm just trying to relate that to your relational idea as well.
Yeah, here's the quote actually I was referring to. I just dug it up here. So he says, the deniers, this is Abdul Baha, the deniers ask in their disbelief, where is that world? For whatsoever hath no actual material existence is sheer imagination. But the truth is that world of existence is a single world, although its stations are manifold in accordance with the manifold reality of things. For instance, the world of the mineral, plant, and animal existence is the same world. Despite this, the animal world in relation to the world of the vegetable is a spiritual reality, another world and abode. That's a provisional translation. So I don't.
Very illuminating. That was an illuminating idea as I was thinking through these issues. That how we define spiritual is really relative, and that it's just a higher level of consciousness, if you will. I think Michael is, I wanted to make a point on Michael's point about the worlds of God. And this is because I recognize that a lot of folks that are listening to this may not have exposure to the Baha'i faith. Baha'u'llah refers to, in his writings, somewhat tangentially at times, to the worlds of God. The thing that strikes me, when his wife passed, when Baha'u'llah's wife passed away, he said, "She is my companion throughout all the worlds of God," you know, and there's different examples where Baha'u'llah mentions this. And what is explained to us is exactly as Michael was pointing out, that after we die, we don't go to just heaven and that's it. We continue to evolve as spiritually evolve beyond that. And it's not just a one-time deal and then we float around for the rest of whatever, right? We continue to evolve. And that's what Baha'u'llah talks about, the world of God. That you should tie that back to a passage in the Gospels where Jesus, when he was describing his death, his impending death and martyrdom and crucifixion, said to his followers, don't worry. He says, "I will go and prepare a place for you. My Father's house has many rooms," right? And so Abdul-Baha, I believe, explained that meant, what that meant is what Baha'u'llah expanded on further, that our souls will continue to go through these worlds of God as we spiritually evolve. I just wanted to make that point for folks that may not be familiar with these writings.
So I was thinking of something when you said about, I've been trying to understand physics and quantum physics and most of it entanglement. I find it really interesting and fascinating. And but what it's really interesting that you just said now is like what we really do is measure the relationship. That's what we know, if I'm understanding it correctly. That's what we know, that things exist, right?
Yes.
We measure, and what I understand is a relationship. Because measuring creates a relationship, right? Like how far you are, how hot and how cold I am. And so the two different physical objects or whatever, they have a relationship.
Right.
So, and that gets me to the idea that hidden word that Baha'u'llah writes and says, "Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee." So Baha'u'llah is saying that we need to have a relationship with God so we actually exist, right? Because God is the source of all existence. So if we don't develop that relationship through love, then our existence is really not, there is no relationship, there is no measurement in that, in our own life, right? And so to me, is that something that makes sense to you? Is it, or am I like?
No, that's I've never thought about that, but I think there's something there. There's another thing that struck me. Well, in this question of measurement, actually, it's you mentioned quantum mechanics. It's actually very deeply, and I didn't talk about this at all. It's very deeply related to quantum mechanics. That's one of the very important aspects is the kind of mystery of measurement. There's a famous physicist, von Neumann, who kind of describes the different types of physics that go on in quantum mechanics. And really, this really means all of physics, because everything begins with quantum mechanics. And this is, he says that there are two types of physics. One is causal physics, that is, it's predicted, it can be evolved forward and backwards, and it works causally. So you do this and then X happens. And that describes in the quantum mechanics the evolution of the state function, without being measured. It evolves nicely and causally. Then there's a causal type of physics, which involves a measurement. So as soon as you take a measurement of a quantum mechanical object, you collapse it, and you're actually creating information when you do that, because you're reducing the state to a single state, and you've violated what is called unitarity. Unitarity is not preserved, which is basically an idea that information has been preserved. You're creating information, and that's a random. Well, we call that a random type of event. So what's interesting is this idea of measurement, I think, in my opinion, is kind of really related to maybe the very creative act that occurs. And there's this very beautiful, I find beautiful, tablet of Baha'u'llah's. It's very short. It's again, it's a provisional translation that Stephen Lambden has done, and it's basically Baha'u'llah talks about how when he made the point on the letter B, I believe it is, that point distinguished between the future knowledge and past knowledge. And really, when you understand it, that what is a measurement, it is really, in quantum mechanics, it's resolving something spatially to a point, right? And it's really this measurement process. If you think of what is a measurement really amounts to the formation of memories, right? Because when you measure something, you have to make a memory of it. That's what it means. You have to record it. Now, it can be a temporary or what, but you're making a memory, okay? So it is in that memory that reality is being generated, and so it's resolving that point. And that also distinguishes, also making that point, you also distinguish between past information and future information, because you can take that information about that measurement that you make at that point and evolve it in two different ways. You can either evolve it into the future and based on the laws of physics and move it forward, or you can devolve it into the past. And they're symmetric. You can evolve it in different ways. Anyways, there's
So interesting.
yeah, there's a lot of you can.
Yeah. Also, I was thinking that in the what physics really does is kind of explains the relationship of the world, the universe, and at some point in history, because I was learning that with Pythagoras and before that, they try to explain the world, and they create physics, right?
Mhm.
And and they use it to explain the world, but it was a lot more like who we are, why we're here, have we been created, where do we come from. So through that they start explaining the world, and then in time it became separated from the true questions. It became kind of oh no, it's more mathematical and it's more about Newtonian and all that, and it's not about the spiritual. But I think the source of it was always spiritual, because they try to explain this life thing, this universe that is full of life.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I think actually there's this split between science and religion is really the fault on many of religion, and that it's because we basically took materialism took over religion. In other words, what I mean is that we took these allegories, these spiritual allegories, is really kind of idealistic understandings of Scripture, what is in the Bible and in the Old Testament and everything, and tried to materialize them, tried to physicalize them, tried to make them and turn them into a type of material. It basically became a materialistic philosophy, because they took these things which should have been understood in their idealized forms and tried to literalize them, tried to make it into a material type of thing, and that of course is nonsense, and so when then they came to the modern age and they realized that it was nonsense, they're like, okay, well then they went to real materialism, because they're rejecting these people just misunderstood the idealism that was inherent in their own scripture. And actually, if you dig deep into Christianity, for example, you see that it is that the birth of Neoplatonism actually went hand in hand with Christianity. You have early church fathers like Origen, who were really Neoplatonists. And, like the opening verse of John, it says, in the beginning was the word. That word is logos. I mean, he's using these Neoplatonic ideas in a very clear way. And they just misunderstood this later on. In fact, you can see even when the fall and descent into the Dark Ages occurred exactly when the church turned against Neoplatonism, when they started to when they turned and they had riots in Alexandria against Origen and his philosophy of that believed that God was incorporeal. They had riots about it. All these monks went nuts, and and so finally Theophilus, the patriarch there, said, even though he didn't believe it, he was scared. He acceded and said, okay, we're going to condemn Origen. We're going to say that he was a heretic. And he kind of satisfied them. And then a mere, few years later, like 20 or so years later, these were the same guys that then turned around and murdered Hypatia. You know about her. She was one of the last academics of the, woman, female academic. And they burned down these same monks burned down the University of Alexandria. And that really signals when we descend into the Dark Ages.
Wow.
So Vahid, one of the things because I know some folks may not understand these terms, but the Platonic idea, right, which then got incorporated into Neoplatonism. When something sort of evolves, we often put neo on the front of it, right? Mm-hmm. But it's this idea that, as Michael had said, I think that this world is really just the physical manifestation of abstract forms that exist behind it. And if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that that was a fundamental idea in Christianity, as it is really in all religion.
Right.
And it was, expressed by Origen, the great early Christian philosopher. And then they really turned and Christianity became sort of this literal thing.
Materialistic. It just became materialism. They wanted to make God a physical thing that was walking around. They kind of went back to paganism on some level if you think about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably right. I mean, I think the way I think about paganism and the transition to a concept of the oneness of God, and that was why that was such a unifying idea, is it was an abstraction, right? It was abstracting beyond the physical idols that they worshipped, or in the modern day we worship flags, right?
Yeah.
And everybody gets excited about the flag, but it's not the flag that's important. It's the ideas that that it reflects.
Yeah. And even the Trinity concept, actually, I think also kind of, it's interesting when you start to look at Neoplatonism, you begin to realize, oh, this is actually what Abdu'l-Baha is talking about. When he talks about the absolute essence and then the manifestation and all this stuff. I mean, this is the one in Neoplatonism, and logos is the manifestation. That's the first mind of the one, and that logos is called God. And that's the confusion in Christianity, is they don't even understand what they were really saying. And so now they wanted to identify, they were confused, and they were saying, oh, is he man God? Is he God man? No, he's a manifestation. He's logos, which has a clear meaning. It's not equivalent. It's called God, but it's not God, And it's a reflection. And even Paul, in his letters, he uses the word image. He calls it, he's the image of God. But I think it's just, they just didn't understand.
Right.
They just could not understand it. Maybe they, just.
I want to address one last thing. If anybody else has a question, I don't want to take the remaining time, but I want to ask one more question. Unless somebody else has a question. You mentioned the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. There's a phrase in there that says that humanity has been created in the image of God, right? And there's this wonderful quote, which always struck me, and I believe Baha'u'llah quotes it in the Kitab-i-Gan, the Book of Certitude, which is the first time I heard it. It comes from an Islamic tradition, from the Prophet's son-in-law, Ali, who said, God, within the voice of God, do you think you are a puny form when within you the universe has been unfolded? Referring to human beings. Do we think we're just this little material thing, animals running around beating each other up, when in reality the universe has been enfolded within us? I always thought it was just a beautiful idea. And I wondered if you could comment on that in relation to some of the other things you've been mentioning. What is our role in this, I suppose? What is our role in this relationship thing? We have this, seem to have some special role.
I don't know. I've thought about that verse actually in the context of, Baha'u'llah talks about how man is a supreme talisman. I always wondered about that. I was like, what does that mean?
So let's define a talisman.
Yeah. So talisman, basically, if you go back to the original meaning of it, it's basically, it represents, you say it's an amulet or something that, but if you get back to its root, really what it is it's something that models the universe, or models something, it's a model of something. And so I think of it this way, that really human beings kind of represent this image of God, in a sense, that we're the model. And why you model things is you model it so that you can attain predictions about what's going to unfold in the future. And using predictions, then you can order things, and you create. Really, the creation of order on some level is predicated on the ability to predict. I think she has her.
Diane has let me unmute you, Diane. Okay.
Just looking it up, talisman is an object held to have magical powers or promoting protective powers or charm. And I think this refers to the fact that we have a soul. As a Baha'i, I was, brought into this faith saying that this whole physical existence, our first crack at, life is in a classroom where science, math are used to discover spiritual truths, because we're babies, and this is how we learn the alphabet of the universe, and how we learn, what creation is about, by discovering things in our world. And as far as Catholicism goes, there was an awful lot of insecurity, because the popes declared themselves infallible at one of their councils, and Jesus never said that they were infallible. He was, but they weren't. So there was a bit of insecurity, and also the fact that Christianity was collapsing at the time when Islam was rising. One manifestation peters out all of his teachings, and we simple things, we screw it up, so we need another person to come and teach us basics, so the next manifestation comes. All the technological things that we've gotten since Baha'u'llah spoke and charged the atmosphere, these are all truths that we have to yet to discover. And you're doing a marvelous job with it, with physics and math. But most of us are still caught up in learning the alphabet.
Thank you, Diane. That was very nice. That was lovely. My uncle, who's a Baha'i, says we're spiritual cavemen in our understanding. And you really appreciate that when you read the Baha'i writings and you meditate upon them.
Yeah, the talisman thing, I think it's interesting because, it comes out of, in Shiite understanding, they had a really rich and deep meaning there. So it was, they use it basically as a representation or a model of a higher object, that you could attain some gnosis about that higher object by using that talisman. And in Shaikhi and Babi theology, so the idea was that basically the prophet, for example, is a talisman for God, right?
So when Baha'u'llah says humanity is the supreme talisman, he's referring, it's in the similar sense, you believe, to
Yeah.
we've been created in the image of God.
Yeah, I think he's kind of referencing that in an interesting way.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
We have a question from Kay.
Yeah, it's actually my husband. He
Okay.
something and some answer questions.
Well, I just want to first say about Rumi, and this is in Baha'i literature. It's the fact that he says, I died from material into the vegetable state, then from vegetable to animal, from animal to human, and from human, then I became a spirit. And then he goes on explaining that there's a progression in nature, right? So that's the idea of the spiritual existence of man, because beyond our existence is our spiritual being. Now, and ultimately it says, I become as nothing, ultimately, after he passes the spiritual level. And then he says, I return into the God. So like a drop that falls into the ocean.
Okay.
So it becomes a part of divinity, in effect, at different levels. So that's Kay wants to say something.
Okay, there's a tablet from Abdul Baha to an American believer, and it said, grieve not over the troubles and hardships of this nether world, nor be thou glad in times of ease and comfort, for both shall pass away. This present life is even as a swelling wave or a mirage or drifting shadows. Could ever distorted image on the desert serve as refreshing waters? And then he goes on to say, know thou that the kingdom is a real world, and this nether place is only its shadow stretching out. A shadow hath no life of its own. Its existence is only fantasy and nothing more. It is but images reflected in water, seeming as pictures to the eye.
So this is the essence of definition, I believe, is Neoplatonism, the idea that life and death are just terms defining the spiritual nature of existence. Really, it's not something that we can really understand other than meditate on it. And Abdul Baha, in answer to the definition of religion, nature, and another item, he says the same thing. In other words, he talks about the relationship of things that defines the existence of things.
David Wright has a question. So David, I'll just unmute you.
In reference to the talisman, the supreme talisman, there was a few different interpretations of that, which I liked all of them. And the way when I first read that, man was the supreme talisman in the writings, I looked up talisman like everyone does, right? And what is talisman? And I came to just to think of that as referring to, this talisman is referring to the physical frame of man that carries the reality of man around for a few years here, and moves on, and maybe thinking of the talisman as the five-pointed star of the symbol of man. You know? Hey, and that's my pizza. I don't know if you heard it. Anyway, I love this discussion. This is charming, like a talisman, you know.
Yeah, that's lovely, David. Thank you. You know, what's most known, for those of you who don't know the Baha'i writings, there's a famous quote of Baha'u'llah that he says, man is the supreme talisman, humanity, human beings. Education can alone unlock its benefits and allow all mankind to benefit therefrom. So the quote is often a quote about education, about the value of education and so forth in life. But I think we've always been sort of wondered, what did Baha'u'llah mean by man is the supreme talisman? It's not a word we use in English, and that's why I think we've all had to look it up. But and it's been a discussion. Most of the Baha'i writings are not as confusing, but this has been one I think a lot of us have asked about.
I was going to say that, you know, our supreme talisman is the fact that we have a soul that has the ability to go with a rational mind. And that's why education is so important, because of the simple fact that education and the training of children is among the most meritorious of all human acts, you know, in directing down the grace and the favors of the All-Merciful. The fact that we have minds that can think, and animals can't do that. They don't have that attachment. And when we leave our physical body behind, we are still taking our soul and our rational mind with us. That's part of the magic of being a human talisman.
Wow. Vahid, thank you so much for coming, for preparing your thoughts and you know, initiating what I think for everyone was a very enriching discussion. So,
well, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
It's been my pleasure.
We're going to have you back if that's okay.
Oh, no problem. I love that.
I think we really need to delve into the science and religion piece, and you know how our explorations of this grand world all fit together. And so you really stimulated so many ideas. It was wonderful. So we for the next month we're going to be doing these weekly. Next week, Thursday at 7. We're going to, obviously for Baha'is, we're on the eve of the fast. So I've asked Peter Jule, who's Australian, to come on. Peter's written some wonderful articles about spiritual growth and development on BahaiTeachings.org, and obviously, you know, has a deep knowledge of the faith. And so I really wanted him to come and talk about sort of the spiritual path. What is it that we're actually doing when we're going through this process of the fast and trying to spiritualize ourselves through the fast? So Peter will be joining us from another continent far away. And then during the time of the fast, Sifter of Dust, we've done this for a couple of years and it's been fairly popular. Every morning and evening, we post a quote, mostly from the Baha'i writings, but not exclusively, for folks to meditate on. This year, what we're going to do is on weekly at 7 o'clock, we're just going to get together. We're going to, after folks have had a chance to look at the quotes over the course of the week, we're going to ask what inspired you, and we're going to talk about it. And so we'll do that in the sessions we have during the fast. So that's, by the way, finally, on that point, I'll be sending out through Sifter of Dust something called the 19-day challenge, which we've done in the past as well. So if you have friends who are not Baha'is, but would like to sort of accompany you on your 19-day challenge, the one we have, they can also subscribe and get these quotes morning and evening. I framed it a couple of years ago that people could give up some bad habit, but you know, it's just join you in this sort of spiritual time, and they can join you by just following along with the passages that we put out morning and evening. So invite your friends. When you see that on Sifter of Dust, please send it along to your friends and invite them to join with you, and then join us on Thursday nights to talk about it. So thank you so much, Vahid.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, come back anytime.
Sure.
Yeah, everyone, come back anytime.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
One more.
Thank
That was
you.
awesome.
More.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Nice to meet you all.